Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. Today was a very special day. There was a worldwide cry out, call out for Mashiach. So please God, God heard our prayer. And please God, Mashiach should come immediately, where there will be no more pandemics, no more sickness. Godliness will be revealed in the world. It will be all exciting times. But this last year has been such a challenging time for people. People felt that they're drowning. People have been in darkness, and for good reason. People felt darkness, and people don't see light at the end of the tunnel. What was the Rebbe's view on this? We have with us Rabbi Dovid Wineberg from the Murray Road Synagogue in Cape Town, who's an outstanding speaker, scholar, and somebody who passionately lives the Rebbe's teachings, and he's going to take us on a journey of what the Rebbe said. So, Rabbi Wineberg, thank you for making the time on this very important subject. It's going on YouTube and Facebook. So, thank you for doing this, and over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Masinta Chabadas, for organizing the talk, and to all those who co-sponsor the event. It's really a privilege to be here from Cape Town together with you and to talk on a topic that is obviously very close to all our hearts. The challenge of dealing with the overwhelming feelings that tend to wash over us. And how do we stay afloat? Have you ever noticed that often the greatest inventions have a certain sense of simplicity? It's an incredible thing that often things that are so life-changing, in retrospect, are so simple. I remember when somebody introduced me to Uber. It hadn't yet come to South Africa. And he tried to explain to me this concept called Uber. Today, it's so ubiquitous. It's a verb. It's not only a noun. It's not only a thing. It's what we do. I couldn't understand it until, of course, the first time I actually used Uber, and everything made so much sense. Things that are sometimes so simple are so life-changing. Many inventions are like that. And today we're going to look at the Rebbe's simple solution to how we push away the darkness. How do we stay afloat when things are completely overwhelming us? And really that is it. That when we say something simple, it doesn't mean that it's easy. It means that in retrospect, it's a method that is accessible, doable, and life-changing. One of the hallmarks of the coronavirus is certainly the way it's affecting all of us. There's nobody unaffected by coronavirus. We're all in the same sea. We're not all in the same boat. Our boats are different. Our experiences are different. Our challenges are different. But we're all struggling with the storms of coronavirus. We're all looking at our websites and news regularly to see the latest information, the latest vaccines, the latest numbers, the latest numbers of those who have caught the virus, the latest number of those who have Rahman al-Islam passed away from the virus. Is it going up? Is it going down? Where is it heading? What are the realities in our particular country, lockdowns, and so on and so forth? We're completely overwhelmed, and we're completely glued to these realities. And equally, we are uncertain. We are uncertain about what the future brings. And in this uncertainty, I think lies a tremendous tension and something that is truly overwhelming. Today, we know the Rebbe to be the most influential religious Jewish figure since Maimonides, globally affecting the world, changing the world's and Jewish landscape. Today is another very special day. Rabbi Masinta mentioned the call, the international global call for Mashiach. Today is also a special day because it's the 9th of Adar, which is the anniversary of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's arrival and move to the shores of the United States during the Second World War in 1940, where he proclaimed his absolute commitment and determination to change that landscape. 10 years later, our Rebbe succeeded him and took over a community and a people that were really on the ropes, people who were challenged emotionally, dealing with the terrible horrors of the Holocaust or escaping Stalin's communist Russia. People who, as Orthodox Jews, were certainly in a defensive posture in the United States. The world and the Jewish world that the Rebbe inherited in 1950 in the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe was not a simple one, yet we know the results of what he achieved and how Yiddishkeit looks today. How did he do it? He did it with one simple secret, the secret of light. The power of light, I believe, lies at the core of the Rebbe's entire mission. And as we're going to see through different incidences and events, interactions, and advice that the Rebbe offers, This simple method of insisting on always increasing and focusing on the light allowed the Rebbe to influence change in individuals and allowed the Rebbe to influence change globally. So we're going to look at two little videos now. They're two videos from dollars. Most of you know what dollars is. The Rebbe had a practice from the late 1980s to interact with people by offering everybody $1 to pass on to charity. And this became very popular. Every Sunday, people knew you can come and meet the Rebbe, this global leader. Nobody checked beforehand what you said or did. You came into the queue, you brought your challenge, your problem, or just simply to see the Rebbe and receive his blessing. And thousands of people would come by on a weekly basis. Here are two incidences, two moments from these life-changing moments from dollars.
Geboren Naid, geboren in Galach, mit 6 Jahren, jetzt will kommen zurück. Die Eltern sind gewesen Jiden.
The mother's name, Jackson.
The mother's name?
Gittel, ja. So dann okay, das haben gute Nice. Der Name von meiner Mutter. Was ein gute Nice, und alle möchten die Nice. Und vergessen auf die anderen Sachen, wir haben eine Diskussion schon im Tevis. Dann jüdische Jahren, Telejahren.
Der Weg gebrochen Parnasse jetzt, also wir ablassen jene Sachen kommen zurück.
Was ist das, was du hast schon lange vergessen, als wir stand. Das ist eine gute Geschichte.
Here we see a fascinating thing. For those who didn't pick up the nuance, let me quickly recap. A fellow who had lived his life as a Christian priest, born a Jew, lived his life as a Christian priest, had decided to renounce this way of life and embrace his Yiddishkeit. He came to the Rebbe for a blessing and a concern about his parnasa, about his livelihood. The Rebbe immediately pivots to the future, the present and future, does not want to hear about the past, notices his Jewish name, affirms his Jewishness, and when asked, what's he going to do a living now? How's he going to make a living? The Rebbe doesn't want to hear about the past. He only says there will be a future and don't even talk about the past. To think about that idea, where's the tikkun? Where's the correction? Where's the process? Where's the ability to go back and actually change what happened and somehow correct it? The Rebbe, in his emphasis of light and positivity, wants to move forward and completely seems to avoid that. It's a strange thing. We're going to examine that in a few moments to understand. But now let's look at another incident. Another moment of a fellow who came out of prison and comes to the Rebbe again with a blessing and looks for some sort of understanding, some sort of atonement, and look at the Rebbe's response.
Das auch gibt es Charity in California. Doch, Charity in California.
I was in prison, and this rabbi here, and also the feeling of you helped me get through it.
God Almighty will soon forget about all this past.
I don't.
Has manche seen, you know what Passover is?
Yes.
Yeah. If the Jews have forgotten about Mitzrayim, it is time for you to forget about your prison also. God Almighty bless you. Even if it's difficult, but try your best. God Almighty bless you.
Thank you.
Here is something so counterintuitive and in fact so counter to what we know in terms of our relationship with Egypt. We are commanded to remember the Exodus on a daily basis. We are and go through and reenact our slavery every year. We're going to do it in a little over 4 weeks on Pesach. And yet the Rebbe tells this fellow who had been in prison, his face is pixelated to preserve his privacy, that he should forget about having been in prison. And the man says, I don't forget. In other words, the man is saying, I want to preserve that memory so that I know and remember how to act better. But the Rebbe is saying, no, I want you to forget it because the Jews were able to forget that they were in Egypt. Is that true? How can we say that the Jews forgot we're in Egypt? We're remembering our Exodus every day. So the Rebbe is here in two little moments, guiding individuals in life-changing directions with a perspective that demands understanding and recognizes something revolutionary. Friends, King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, V'ra'iti ani, I saw, says the wisest man on earth in history. I saw that there's an advantage to wisdom over foolishness, like the advantage of light over darkness. This is a very strange statement on the face of things. What exactly is King Solomon telling us that we don't already know? Do we need the wisest man in the world to proclaim that wisdom is better than foolishness and stupidity? Do we need a metaphor or a parable of light over darkness? How does that even help us understand why wisdom is better than stupidity? Because light is better than darkness? What exactly is King Solomon telling us here? And the Untitled Rebbe in Tanya, in the 12th chapter, teaches us something very important. He says that what King Solomon is talking about is not simply the qualitative value of wisdom over stupidity. Everybody knows that wisdom is better than stupidity. Everybody would embrace wisdom and reject something that is foolish and stupid. The Untitled Rebbe says, look at the manner of how wisdom. Do you want to know how wisdom can overwhelm foolishness and nonsense? The same way that light overwhelms darkness. Because when we notice how light overwhelms darkness, we have a whole new paradigm. Light does not simply beat darkness away. It does not fight with darkness. It does not engage with darkness, or as the Rebbe says, you don't chase it away with a broom. Light simply automatically on its own, when you light a candle, the darkness on its own moves away. Kederech memela. And in these few words, we get the vision of how we in our times can deal with negativity, can deal with challenges, and can actually change completely the paradigm within which we operate. Don't fight with the darkness. You're feeling overwhelmed with worry, with fear, with uncertainty, with guilt, with a past. Simply light a candle. Simply illuminate your present, and the darkness melts away on its own. This is what the Rebbe is telling this man. Yetzias Mitzrayim. We remember that we left Egypt, not that we were in Egypt. The main emphasis is on the Exodus. The main emphasis is that we are not there. The main emphasis is that we have moved away from there into the light, as we say in the Haggadah, Ma'afela ergodol, from a darkness into a great light. Focus on the light, and the Exodus simply melts away. Don't define yourself by your prison experience. Don't define yourself as a prisoner. Define yourself as a Yid, as a servant of Hashem, as a family person, as a citizen. Define yourself positively, and the other things simply melt away. But if you harp and you simply wallow in the experience of an individual who had sunk so low that they ended up in prison, this would hold you back. It keeps you in the shadows. It keeps you in the darkness rather than allowing you to embrace the light. And here the Rebbe is radically giving us an understanding of how to actually view ourselves. To view ourselves as a thing of the past, as activities of the past, is to wallow in them. Sometimes it actually suits people's purpose. It fits their moods. It fits their personality and temperament. But the Rebbe is saying that's not the way you grow. That's not the way Yiddishkeit grows. It's not the way a human being grows. It's not the way societies grow. Rather focus on the light. Focus on kindling a little bit more positivity. The darkness melts away on its own. And here we have, when we're looking at our situation, when we're looking at global events that are simply beyond our control and simply beyond anybody's ability to predict, to understand, to, with any reasonable degree of certainty, figure out where it's going to head. The question is, what are we doing in this time? I want to share with you a little personal story that happened to me a few weeks ago. And for me, it was an illustration of exactly this value. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was sort of dozing and I got an email. So I looked at the email at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant email. It brought some very unpleasant news, which really created a lot of worry, a lot of tension, a lot of challenges. Immediately I was awake. My mind was alert. I'm thinking about this problem, and now it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and sleep is the furthest thing from my mind. But I realized that I can't solve this problem now. I also can't sleep, but I'm completely overwhelmed with the worry of the news that this email had brought into my life. And so I decided to do something. I decided to practice what I preach. I thought, what would the Rebbe do? The Rebbe would want me to bring light. So let's think about something else. I have these worries in my mind, but I can choose to think about something else. Let me think about helping somebody. Let me think about somebody who is going through a hard time. It wasn't hard to find that because my friends, in that particular week, my congregation had lost 7 members to coronavirus. 6 out of 7 were coronavirus. So there was a lot of tragedy. There was a lot of hurt going on around us. And I thought, how could I help one of those people? And I zeroed in on one young girl who had been exceptional in her Yiddishkeit, exceptional in her involvement in community, and had gone through a terrible, terrible loss. And I thought, what would this person want in their life? How can I bring them a little bit of comfort? Immediately a plan came into my mind of something that Torah study based that we can introduce, that we can bring into them, that would bring this person and their family comfort. The next day, I worked on it overnight. I'd already spent time on emails. The entire following day was a different experience because I had chosen to focus on light rather than on darkness. My problems didn't disappear, but the darkness melted away. My headspace was in a different place. My concern, my worries were in a different direction, and the other issues sort themselves out. We deal with them, but the space of light allowed the darkness to melt away. My grandfather of blessed memory, Rabbi Dovid Wineberg, was a well-known chassid and globetrotter for the Rebbe, teacher of Tanya, an exponent of Hasidus. And one night, late at night, he received a phone call from somewhere in the middle of America, a businessman who had gone through some very dangerous issue and a life-threatening problem in the medical issue. And he called my grandfather to run to the Rebbe to ask for a bracha. It was quite late, 2 or 3 in the morning, but there was a night that the Rebbe was seeing people and Yechidus. And so my grandfather quickly ran over, hoping to be able to catch the Rebbe before he went home after meeting individuals from 8 o'clock that night until the list ended at 2 or 3 in the morning. By the time he reached there, the list had ended. The Rebbe was still in his office with his personal secretary. And so my grandfather, not wishing to disturb them, wrote a note with a request, put the man's name and his mother's name, and put it into the door handle, hoping that and expecting that the Rebbe's secretary would open the door, see this note wedged into the door, and hand it to the Rebbe for guidance and blessing. But the next day he was told that in fact, the secretary didn't notice it. The secretary had opened the door, the paper fell, and the Rebbe noticed it. The Rebbe then bent down to pick it up. The last thing a devoted chassid of the Rebbe wants to do is make the Rebbe bend down and have to be disturbed or bothered after meeting people for many, many hours, exhausted. To put the Rebbe out like that mortified my grandfather, who loved the Rebbe with every fiber of his being, was so devoted to his vision, to his mission, to his teachings. And so he wrote and penned a letter of apology. He asked the Rebbe for forgiveness for having forced the Rebbe to lift something up, which wasn't his intention. And he asked the Rebbe he said, sorry. The Rebbe wrote back a beautiful reply where the Rebbe revealed his real purpose, his function as Rebbe. And the Rebbe's answer was in Hebrew, Haloi kol inyani is uftzahim. You are apologizing for making me pick something up. That is my whole purpose. My whole purpose of the Rebbe is to lift up, especially that which other people overlook. And this, the Rebbe reveals his very identity, his entire function as Rebbe, the method with which he's going to change a Yiddish world around him by lifting it up, by lifting it a bit higher. As we say in this week's Parsha of Tetzaveh, in the first verse, that we bring oil to Moshe Rabbeinu. For what purpose? Laha'alot ner tamid, to lift up a constant flame of light. And here, again, this simile of light, the simile of upliftment, of positivity, the utter rejection of negativity, even when it's our own, to simply say, I look forward. Where can I make a difference? How can I change something? Here we have the focus of how the Rebbe wants to change ourselves and the world around us. I'd like to finish off with a story. There's a video of this story, but I'm going to tell the story. A video of the Rebbe telling the story. And perhaps at the end, we can just play it if you want to see the Rebbe telling the story with all its details. But in brief, this story was told by the Rebbe on a date we're all familiar with, September 11th, 1975. The first part of the date we're familiar with. The year was a different year. And in honor of his mother's yahrzeit, the Rebbe had a farbrengen. And the Rebbe shared a story, which he said is not simply a tale. The people of whom he's telling the story, he knows the names, their address, where they live. And he insisted that this is not an exception, that this is in fact a common story that the Rebbe has been receiving reports of such an event and such stories. He told the story of a young Jewish girl who had been encouraged by another young Jewish girl, not even bat mitzvah, who had come to their school in Israel, not a religious school, and had encouraged the girls to start lighting Shabbat candles. Just 2 years earlier, the Rebbe had started a campaign to encourage girls, younger girls, to also light, not only when they're married, not only when they're bat mitzvah, but even when they're old enough to understand what they're doing. Light Shabbat candles. Bring light into the world. What a familiar theme to us this evening. And here the Rebbe shared the impact of this little act. Because a young girl under bat mitzvah had gone into a school to share with the girls this wonderful thing. And this little 5 or 6 year old girl came home and told her mom on Friday she wants to light Shabbat candles. But the mom had never grown up with Yiddishkeit in her home. She was not familiar with Shabbat candles. She was uncomfortable with the idea of more religious activities, and she refused. So the child began to kick and scream like children can do and get upset. Well, the mother didn't want the child to be agitated. She agreed to light the candle for Shabbat. The next week, the parents saw it wasn't so bad, so they decided to let her do it again. She did it with the same excitement and energy. And suddenly, week after week, this was happening, and the child is lighting candles and dressing up for Shabbat. So the mom feels that she should also do it. Why is the child doing it, not her? Once they're both lighting candles, the mom dresses appropriately for Shabbat. Now she's uncomfortable turning on the oven. So she's now cooking things before Shabbos for Shabbos. And while the Shabbos candles are burning on a Friday night, she's not watching television. Before you know it, this family had completely transformed their lives into one of observance of Torah and mitzvahs, all from a little candle, all from a little light. Rather than battling the darknesses in our life, rather than arguing with the forces that seek to drag us down, to make us heavy, to make us negative, to feel negative, the Rebbe says the wisdom is light one candle. Light a little bit more light in your life. Look around you and see, what can I do to help somebody? How can I make a difference in somebody else's life? Unfortunately, as a rabbi, one of the things that I deal with quite often is bereavement. And to see people's grief up close is very, very challenging. And one of the things I've learned is you can see the heroes, the people who amidst their very overwhelming grief, times that really, really are hard, it saps the energy. People find the wherewithal to notice somebody else's pain, somebody else's need, to pick themselves beyond their own misery and pain and notice somebody else is a heroic act, but miraculously and wondrously, it lifts people out of their own misery. It lifts people out of their own darkness. So it's a simple act. To change and shift tack, we all have the ability. You're obsessed your mind with certain things, you can choose to think about something else. Something is making you sad and truly upset for legitimate good reasons. You have the ability to simply acknowledge it, put it on the side, and consider somebody else's pain as well. Maybe you can appreciate their pain because you now know what it feels like, Rahman al-Islam. Whatever the motive, lifting yourself from your own pain or from your own darkness, touching somebody else in that way and caring for them has the most miraculous way of lifting ourselves up from our own darkness as well. And so, friends, the answer and the key is in your hands. How do we chase away the darkness? We can't fight it. We don't need to fight it. Like stupidity, it will drag us down and beat us with experience. Rather, make the effort to light a candle. It's simple, but wow, does it work. We have a world of such darkness, of such fear, of such uncertainty, but we also have millions of points of light, opportunities to make a difference in somebody else's world. Picking up a phone and chasing away somebody else's loneliness has just chased away your own as well. Being concerned with somebody else's Shabbos meal has given you a purpose for that week and that weekend to make a difference so that they have a Shabbat meal. Each act of lifting ourselves up and increasing in light allows us to truly transform ourselves and the world around us to a point where we will be able to have Yetzias Mitzrayim. We will leave this exile, not by fighting with exile, not by noticing its huge grip of thousands of years, but by simply walking into the light, one little candle at a time. I bless you with light in your life, with the ability to lift up in each moment somebody else around you, and in this way to embrace the light.
Rabbi Weinberg, one or two questions are coming in. This was absolutely incredible. In fact, I think I knew the family who sent in the letter to your grandfather. It was Lezenik, if I'm not mistaken, because I sat next to him, his nephew in yeshiva. But
Fascinating.
what happens if somebody's, here's a question that's coming. What happens if somebody's naturally depressive and naturally dark? Can you dispel that darkness? Can you dispel that depression? Or is it a fight all your life? Are you accomplishing anything? Does positive thinking ever help?
So I want to be careful here. We're not talking about positive thinking per se, although it's a very important topic and certainly a very Hasidic axiomatic principle of think good and it will be good. We're not talking about positive thinking per se. We're talking about active thinking. We're talking about choosing your thoughts. So the individual who's depressed, it's a very deep and personal question, and each person's grapple and battle with this is different. But a person generally is in charge of their thoughts. So when we have obsessive thoughts, the more we fight them and fear them, the more obsessed we become with them and the more they have a grip. But we have the ability to choose to actively think about something else. So in a very mild example, I shared my 2 o'clock a.m. Epiphany or experience where I chose to focus on something else. And in that way, I was able to change my reality and shift it. So when we can choose to think about something else, that's not to reject that which we're dealing with. It's not to minimize it. It's to say that we are not our thoughts, that we can choose what we think about. And in this way, to focus our thoughts in a constructive, positive way.
Why don't you just elaborate? Didn't the Rebbe tell Netanyahu something about the United Nations? Some advice for him about a house of darkness and one.
So that's a beautiful story and a beautiful illustration. There are many illustrations of this principle by the Rebbe, but that's a beautiful one. I think it was 1984, and actually we know about it from Bibi Netanyahu himself. Bibi Netanyahu, I don't want to get political. Everybody has their own opinions on politics, but I will comment on one element that I think he's done very successfully and a bit counterintuitively. As a part of his diplomacy, he has insisted on repeating truths, obvious truths, very often, rather than simply dealing and fighting and debating the negativity. He came in, for example, into the UN, and he started talking about the Holocaust. He started pulling out, maps of the Wannsee and minutes of the Wannsee conference. And when Israeli reporters said to him, "What are you doing? We all know the Holocaust exists. Why do you have to share this historical information? And you're not making, what are you actually intending to do?" He said, "I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm doing what the Rebbe told me to do. Because when I was here as ambassador to the UN, many years earlier in 84, the Rebbe told me to light a candle of truth. And that candle of truth, in the darkness of the UN, that darkness in terms of truth and morality, in the darkness of the UN would shine very far." The next year, Bibi Netanyahu actually shared it from the rostrum in the United Nations General Assembly Hall. And he told a story quoting the Rebbe and apologizing to the members of the UN for this description, which apologizing for the undiplomatic way of talking about it, not for the content, and again re-emphasized that his goal is to simply speak truth. And those who want to hear it will hear it. And to focus in that way has brought us diplomatic results, which the whole world is quite surprised by, but is very possibly a result of that focus on lighting candles of truth in houses of darkness. Okay, very interesting question I see over here, Rabbi Nasinta. It is interesting that when Hashem started the creation, the earth was covered in darkness. Here's a fascinating insight. The Medrash comments on the darkness, the primordial darkness, which is very correctly pointed out in this question, that the world was in a state of darkness. The Medrash comments that the spirit that hovered over the darkness is the spirit of Mashiach. In other words, in the process of coming to a point of revelation, to a point of light, one will go through the darkness. But the question is, do we focus on the darkness as a thing in itself, or do we see it as an opportunity to light a brighter and brighter light? Mashiach hovers over the deep of darkness because Mashiach is a transformation of darkness into light. that light is the most intense light there is.
It is related. I just would like you to elaborate on the Rebbe's. You're talking about you can choose what you think, but the Rebbe's choice of words. Apparently, like the Rebbe was against the word hospital or house of the sick, Beta Cholim. There are a few examples of that, of how that can actually transform yourself. Why don't you just give a few examples of that?
So the Rebbe spoke over a leadership of some 44 years. I mean, I don't know how many hours, but probably in the thousands of hours. Much of it recorded, audio recorded, those machines, and all of it recorded from memory and by hand after Shabbos or Yom Tov. Everything's been recorded. And in all those years, the pattern of the Rebbe seeking to avoid any negativity, even when quoting a verse, the Rebbe would stop before the words that indicated bad or negative or impure. He didn't want to say the word impure, and in fact, these are sources in the Talmud and the Torah as well, that the Torah avoids speaking like that. The Rebbe did this in a very careful fashion, and so he took certain words that were common in the language of the day, and he encouraged people to think differently. In Israel, they called a hospital a Bet Cholim, the house of the sick. The Rebbe didn't like that. The Rebbe wrote to a director of a hospital, I don't know which one. The Rebbe wrote a beautiful letter saying that your purpose is to heal people. You should be a Beit Refuah, a house of healing, not a house of the sick. It's true that sick people come, but the function of your house is healing. So the Rebbe did not like that, for example. In a beautiful talk that the Rebbe gave in the 70s to a group of injured war heroes from Israel, from the Yom Kippur War, who had come to New York, and they were all, quite severely physically handicapped in one way or another. They came to the Rebbe. The entire 770 was transformed. The shul was transformed into like a sort of hospital station, so that people, with stretchers and crutches and so on and so forth, could have access. And the Rebbe spoke to them in Hebrew, and the Rebbe shared with them that he was not comfortable with the way the Israeli army referred to them, which was Nechei Tzahal, meaning the crippled of the army. We said that that's contrary to the reality, because when God takes away your ability in one area, he compensates it in another area. So in fact, you are the excelled ones, the exceptional ones of the army. And he said, this is how you have to view yourself and how the Israeli army should view you. You are exceptional, not only in your sacrifice, not only in the work you did, but in your very abilities today. You have an exceptional ability. So in this way, the Rebbe changed the language of how we saw things. I mean, to think about it, in America, in the 1950s and 60s, the house of people of mentally ill was called the house of retarded. And you get a sense of how negative some of these terms are and how corrosive they are. The Rebbe looked to change each one of those.
We would like to see the video of the Rebbe telling the story, and we're going to close with that, but we'd like to hear just one closing thought from you. But we want to thank you for taking the time and sharing with us. And I certainly am going to be focusing on my thoughts on what has to be focused on.
Thank you, Rabbi Masinda. I would just finish off with the power of one candle. It's not necessary to light bonfires. It's not necessary to go and change the world. It's just necessary to reach out one act at a time and light something positive in our own lives and something positive in somebody else's life. Don't let the past hold you back. Embrace your present and make your future with lighting another candle of Torah, a candle of Yiddishkeit, and ultimately the candle of Mashiach. Let's have the video and let's see how the Rebbe tells that story.
Was angegeben, was sich angeheben, was haben eine kleine Mädel von 5-6 Jahren, wo sie gegangen in Beis HaSefer und dort in der Beis Sefer, was sie nicht kindati, in Sakei. Und dort ist gekommen eine zweite Mädel und hat erzählt, dass sie da zusammen nie was hat die erzählt noch vor Bas Mitzvah. Aber es kam, wie kam, sie hat erzählt, was sie seien noch 5-6 Jahre oder noch jünger, אף על פי כן können sie echt mit Sardinien Chinuch, mit Schlichus של הקדוש ברוך הוא, מקיים sein unter die Mitzwe und sagen unter die und die Broche und eben sie willen geben noch ein Brute Litzdoko und durch dem wird sie reinführen den Minien von der Mitzwe und reinführen den Tag von Schabbat. Und wie schauen sie gekommen daheim und hat erzählt der Mutter, und die Mutter gesagt, sie weiß nicht, in einem Morgen, was sie gern, aber Chubeinu kommt mir gewusst von der ganzen Sache, wie das Gehör geworden hat. Der Keres Abbais, die Mutter wird das nicht tun, und die kleine Mädel wird lernen, einführen, neues Dorim in Hui. Von Ktane ist ein Teke von Milliardwörter aufgeregt. Und sie gar nicht scheich ist zu sagen, und kein Agbolle, so hat es ungewöhnlich. Und als sie gebeten, was hat aus der Mutter, sie bet bei ihr, keine Sache nicht mehr nicht wie der Rische, als sie soll können, wenn sie gewinnt Donnerstag, sie Freitag, sie Mittwoch, als sie soll das können tun. Und sie hat ihr gegeben mal leichter und sie weiß die Brache, dort ist er, keine Sache nicht, was man darf sich lernen, die Sprache, das ist er dort die Seesprache mit Katnussen. Und angeschrieben, wir kommen in der und die sie hat gemacht, eine Gewalt mit Prius, hat der Mutter gesagt, er soll sie aufhören, weinen und tun, was sie will, und soll sie lassen zurück. Ist sie geworden bis Simcha Gdele bei Jeser, und hat ihr angesagt, wenn die Zeit ist, auch zu anziehen, den Schabbos-Kedisch, und sie hat gehabt, eine eigene Leichte mit einer eigenen Lichtel und allein angezündet, und gemacht allein der Bruch, ist er gewöhnt bei sich, Leile und Leile. Und danach hatten sich ihr angesagt, der Schabbos, damit das nicht reden und nicht schwieren und nicht schokeln, wie ist er rumgegangen und hat gesagt, die ganze Häuser, man soll nicht schöpfen, die Licht, man soll nicht bloßen auf dem Licht. Da weggestellt die Lichtel auf Nord, auf den Schulchen, wo man hat gegessen, aber die Mutter und der Vater, der Brüder, sie hat mit der Brüder, Schwester, gesehen, als er nicht in Gewalt, und ist auf dem Schabbat, auf dem Freitag, wo hat mir gelost anziehen und keine Sturz. Aber mit derselben Feierlichkeit, mit derselben Barriere, und das zeigt mal Spiel gewesen auf Scharbnei Arbeit. Als er durchgegangen nach Porsche Bossi, hat nur gehört anstellen dem Television, Kolsmann der Lichter gebrägt. Ich habe gesagt, Mai, Haich, wir sind zu der Mutter gefragt beim Vater, zu der Vater beim Mutter, und gesagt, als ich selbst hat etwas geordnet. Aber die kleine Mädel geht da rum und singt, dass das ein herrlicher Schabbat. Und der Licht brennt noch. Ist Kolsmann, der Licht brennt auf dem Tisch, kann er bei sich nicht pennen, anstellen die Television. Danach ist die Wärme nach Telefon, sind die gegangen, zu dem Telefon. Danach hat die Mutter etwas angegeben, gucken, als sie sagt, ob es ist modern. Da geht er rein nach Schochentitz, zur Freundin, setzt als sie brennt ein Lichtel, und die kleine Tochter ihre ist Molle Simche, weil sie hat angezündet nach Schabbosdike Licht, und teilt hat das an Nerkodisch, Vegenkodisch, Vechulu, und sie geht da rum in einer Woche dicke Kleidung, sie selbst hat etwas geordnet. Als sie sich mit Jasche gewöhnt, die Hima, sie tegen alle in Zinkenlicht. Als sie tonke mit Zinkenlicht, hat sie dann noch bei sich nicht gekonnt pennen, sie soll gehen zu den Priete, zu den Meven, und zünden den Feier. Als die Terstone gezünden nach Nerschel Schabbos-Kedisch. Und hat gesagt, der Broche, als das sie Schabbos-Kedisch. Ich weiß es noch drüber, wird sie gehen da rissen, nehmen die Wätschere und dabei veranlöschen, sie anziehen, sie verlöschen, wie cool. Man kann sich aber nicht essen, gestamm als sie kalte, und nun sie machen schon. Aber dann sie machen schon, und das hat schon gehabt, eine Wirkung auf morgendliche Südeiche. Danach ist durchgegangen, wie gerät früher ist, kommen wir erzählen dem ganzen Sipur, der Pfarrer, sie sei schon in der Darge von Beile Tschuwe. Wo man hat angezündet, der kleine Mädel hat angezündet mit einer Säule, mit einem Tummel und mit Prius. Ein kleiner Lichter. Ich bin durchgegangen in ein paar Wochen und es bekommt der Licht hat gebrannt, hat sich ausgehielt von den Jungen schon noch schon viel. Danach hat die Mutter der Kerze bei es all Echeton gegeben, als sie dem Ton der Schaben, uns in der Schaben, so wie Kederich Anoschen, übergebüten sich übergetan Echet. Bei mir hat nicht gepasst, dass Porke mit den Jungen, was man kann verschmieden. Werden ein Fleck auf ein Schabesdicke Kleider, aber ja, bei ihm ein Schabesdicke, ein Jontendicke Kleider, ein Kleider mit Juches Vechulu, und hat sich übergestellt, die ganze Huis. Von was hat das genommen? Von einem Herrschel Schabbos, was hat angezündet mit der Druf, Tag mit der Chinuch. Ich darf von der Reis nicht nur der Chinuch, von der kleinen Mädel, aber ich habe sie werden aber das Mitzvah. Wenn sie mit keinem sagt, die Mitzvah beschleunigen muss, nur durch den Ruf, was sie mechanisch werden, die ganze Huis. Und nicht mechanisch, wenn bei Schoren, wie gerät früher, man weiß die Stadt und mit der Gas und Mispera Beiß und der Namen von der Sprache. Wir kommen